Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And it's another one of our All Things Africa edition. We continue to explore the history and current affairs of each Africa country. We finished North Africa and Chad, and we now explore the country of Angola. And who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our historical guide, our tour guide, Abiomi Azikawe of Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Abiomi is a longtime historian, journalist, Pan Africanist, leftist, and anti imperialist activist. And just before yes, and just before we begin, reminders to our audience that, as always, before we start, please share widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present episodes, our playlists. I recently done some new playlists. Please share us widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present. Help us overcome the far right algorithms and the dominant monopoly Western corporate state media and pseudo leftist websites have in the social media world by sharing our content. Share us across social media and email, and please donate if you can to One Plus One at our PayPal. And if you are having trouble and would prefer a different form of donation, then please get in touch with me at yurismouter@gmail.com. And sometimes Facebook blocks my ability to share One Plus One. So again, please share widely. It helps the show immensely. And it's our only way of overcoming colonial, pro-imperialist, sexist, heteronormative, and racist media. So now on to the topic at hand. So Abiomi, as always, first off, welcome back to the show. And as always, Abiomi, tell us what was Angola like before Portuguese colonization? How did Portugal make it a colony? And what were the conditions of the Angolans like under Portuguese colonial rule?
Well, first of all, the history of the area that is now known as Angola goes way back. There's evidence of presence there by human beings going all the way back to the Paleolithic period, which is the Old Stone Age, as well as the Neolithic period, which is the so-called New Stone Age. The early inhabitants have been categorized as the San people. Some people refer to them as the Bushmen, which has become a negative connotation at this point. But they had been there for thousands of years prior to the advent of European colonialism and enslavement. There was also the Khoikhoi, who some people relate to the San people, and they have the phrase Khoisan, which is describes some of the early indigenous peoples on the African continent. Later, intervening in that process was the so-called Hottentots, who were another ethnic group that had developed over a period of centuries. And then, of course, the so-called Bantu, which interpreted in traditional African languages, this means people, those who are of human origin and continuity. So
Interesting.
yes, it's a long history. The San, the Khoikhoi, the Khoisan, the so-called Hottentots, and the Bantu go back thousands of years in Southwest Africa. One of the early civilizations that arose around the 13th century was the Congo Kingdom. And why is it called Congo? Because the Portuguese, the Belgians, the French had not yet divided Angola from Namibia and from other parts of the Southwest Africa region, including South Africa. And also today's Democratic Republic of Congo, Republic of Congo, Brazzaville, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So this civilization arose, according to documents, around the 13th century. They were a large kingdom. They began to conduct trade with the Portuguese during the early years of the 15th century. One of their kings, Alfonso I, was in fact someone who had what is considered cordial relations with the Portuguese explorers.
Mm-hmm.
He, in fact, adopted Catholicism as a religion, as other monarchies and monarchical leaders did accept through trade and through exchange of correspondence with the Portuguese. Nonetheless, there were other groups that did not accept Christianity as as a religion, and maintain their indigenous religions during that particular time period. People who later came into the area and who integrated with the existing indigenous people brought metal works into the society, very sophisticated artwork, and the development of certain commodities which were utilized for trade. Congo was based on an agricultural economy, and this served as a basis of trade between the Portuguese and the indigenous people of the area. South of the Congo Kingdom was, of course, the Kingdom of Ndongo, and that became a very, very important civilization for the simple reason that it brought about greater contradictions between Portugal and somewhat between Spain as well as the Dutch, who were jockeying for control, not only in Europe, but also in Africa as well. There were periods of time when Spain had been dominant within Portugal, and that played out as well in the overseas territories, the colonial territories. Slavery became a major impediment to the development of the people of Angola. The Portuguese kidnapped and exported many Africans to the Western Hemisphere. A lot of them went to Brazil, but also a number of them came to the United States as well. In fact, the 20 enslaved Africans who were brought to Virginia in 1619 had been expropriated by the British from Portuguese slave vessels. And those 20 people who were brought here, it's considered a turning point in the overall history of North America, as well as world history. So yes, there's been a lot of research done into the development of history in Angola, as well as Congo. And we can get into that later on in the program. But I just wanted to mention that the Ndongo and the Matambe peoples were very instrumental, particularly during the late 16th and 17th centuries in regard to the struggle against colonialism.
In fact, Abiomi, at the end of the recording, give me the name of those two of those two African peoples you talked about. I'll make sure to put a link into the show notes so that people can further educate themselves because it's quite fascinating. Because in fact, sorry to interrupt, but I do have to interrupt this. So you were talking about the San people, the Bantu people, and the Khoikhoi people. So is Angola considered part of South Africa then, or?
Yeah, the Southern Africa region. Yes.
Okay. So this is the beginning. So this actually is the beginning of us looking at the region of Southern Africa. Okay.
Yeah, even today, of course, is the Southern African Development Community. And when we talk later about the independence struggle, it's clearly related to the settler colonialism that existed in South Africa as well as Namibia.
Okay, in fact, because when you were talking about the San people, who I mean, we've now retired using the term Bushmen or
yes.
Bush persons, because when you were talking about the San people and when you were talking about the Kotsi Koheti people, so these are truly indigenous. You can't get more African than these Africans. And they have a very unique form of language where there's clicking, where there's clicking noises. They were hunter gatherers, and they were sort of like how do you say those? Kind of like the Berber community. They're nomadic, correct?
Yeah, the pastoralists. And of course, there were agricultural communities that developed as well during that particular time period. But yes, a lot of the people were hunting and gathering societies, and later, of course, pastoralists, which require the mobilization and the exchange of livestock, and that's considered wealth. It's the basis of the economy in a lot of countries in Southern Africa.
And these people, the San people, they don't just
Yeah.
exist. So they don't just exist in Angola, but they
No.
but them, the Bantu people and the Kahotsi people, you will
Mhm.
find them throughout Southern Africa. Then
Yes, you will. And from South Africa, what is known as South Africa today, to Lesotho, Botswana, they are there. Namibia, as well as Angola, and even sections of today's DRC and ROC. Now, some of the languages spoken by the San, the Khoisan people have largely been extinct. And there are efforts now to try to retrieve those languages from people who continue to speak them, but they are very, very limited in regard to the number of people who do speak these traditional African religions. And even in Congo itself, if you go to the forest areas, a lot of the people there have a similar uh, physiology in terms of the shortness, their survival as hunting and gathering communities. So, yes, they constituted a very, very important element in African historical development, human development in particular.
and again, sorry to get completely off track, because we're supposed to be talking about Angola.
But it's all related. This is what's
Okay,
interesting about it. The
okay.
Europeans carved up these areas, but the people overlap and the cultures overlap and have overlapped for centuries and centuries.
Okay, so then I have to ask then this question, and I think for our Canadian left audience, which is very conscious of the plight of Indigenous people and does solidarity work with Indigenous people, and for those who are interested in the plight of Indigenous people everywhere, do places in Southern Africa, but even other parts of Africa, when we talk about the United Nations rights of Indigenous people and so forth, are a lot of African countries, despite not good relationships with its indigenous people, but are a lot of them all very much supportive of the rights of indigenous people and whatnot. So do the San people and so forth? Are they all considered indigenous people the way we considered all the different Native American tribes, all the First Nations Canadians, all the Inuits, indigenous Greenlanders, the Sami people of the Nordic countries, the indigenous Hawaiians, the indigenous Alaskans who are Inuit. So are a lot of the people like the San people, what used to be called Bushmen, are they considered indigenous when we talk about African affairs and whatnot?
Yes, they are. Although there are contradictions, even all the way up to the modern period, in terms of people being dislocated from their traditional lands. This has been a problem in several countries. So, yes, this is an ongoing debate taking place, not only in Africa, but also in the West as well. And as you mentioned, there are liberals and purportedly progressive forces in the Western imperialist countries, which have accused various independent African governments of disavowing or ignoring the rights of certain groups, traditional groups within Africa. And this extends all the way over to Kenya, Tanzania, as it relates to some of the groups there as well, particularly those that are considered hunting and gathering societies.
And before we get back to Angola and the
Mhm.
resistance and the resistance groups you were talking about, I then have to ask this question: are you familiar with with a movie? I mean, a lot of Africans are offended by it, but I personally really like these two movies because it satirizes
Mhm.
Western capitalism and Western civilization and so forth. Now, have you ever seen these movies called The Gods Must Be Crazy #1 and The Gods Must Be Crazy #2?
They came out in the 1980s. I
Yes.
never saw the movies. I need to look
Okay.
at them. But I have heard from people that, even from the region, who said they found the movies quite entertaining and humorous.
Yes. Well,
So,
Okay,
I have to go look at them.
one of these days, if there still is a Blockbusters or a place where you can rent movies, do check it out. Do check if you do use Netflix or whatever streaming service. Check out The Gods Must Be Crazy #1, #2. It's I think for you who knows so much about Africa, I think you'll actually find them amusing. And for you who is an anti-capitalist, I think you'll like the
Yeah,
satire they make on you know modernity and so forth like that.
exactly.
And that was my first exposure to the San people, the Bushmen, because they actually
Yeah,
do have an actual San person as the lead actor in it, and it's quite a interesting movie. And it also satirizes the conflict between Congo and Angola, and and so forth. So anywho.
interesting.
so
Yeah.
so apologies to the audience. Now we go back to Angola. So Yomi, you were talking about early resistance to Portuguese colonialism and how Portugal colonized what later became Angola. Go right ahead.
Yes, some of the kingdoms that were south of the Congo Kingdom, I mentioned the Ndongo, were very, very important in regard to the resistance because the Portuguese had set up a trading post in Luanda, which became quite formidable. And then, of course, what happened was that they were encroaching on the lands of the indigenous African people. So resistance began to develop very strongly, particularly during the late 1500s, going into the 1600s. And one of the key figures in that resistance was a woman by the name of Queen Anne Zenga, or Queen Nzenga, as she is often called. She was born around 1582. She lived to be in her 80s. She passed away in 1663. But she fought several wars against the Portuguese and for about 40 years. And as a result of that, she has gone down in history as being a formidable figure
Wow.
in the history of Angola and Southern Africa and Africa as a whole. And she was able to get weapons from the Dutch. She had formed an alliance with the Dutch, who were competing with the Portuguese for control of areas in Europe as well as in Southern Africa. So Queen Nzenga was a formidable person. She was the queen of Ndongo as well as the Matamba people. And as I said before, they fought the Portuguese for about 40 years. She was succeeded by two of her sisters, Mukambe, and also that name. Also, she also had a Christian named Barbara, which is very interesting. That some of these groups, at least the leadership, had accepted Catholicism
Mm-hmm.
from Portugal and had taken on European and Christian names as well. But that didn't stop a number of them from fighting against the encroachment of Portugal. As I mentioned, the Portuguese took many, many enslaved Africans out of the continent into Brazil. And that's why today Brazil is considered the largest concentration of African people outside of the continent. There are more people of African descent in Brazil than there are in the United States. United States, there's about somewhere around 40 million, perhaps more now. And a lot of this has to do with
But then also but it also when we talk about the black community in Brazil, which is a large community, is not
yeah.
a minority by any stretch of the imagination.
Mhm.
Indigenous people, ironically enough, are minorities within their own country. But when we talk about the black population of Brazil, okay, so largest concentration of Afro descendant people, but then we also have to add Afro descendants of slaves, then, or
In Brazil, yes, definitely.
okay,
Definitely, yeah, because a lot of them were brought there during the period of the Atlantic slave trade. And a lot of them revolted as well and set up independent communities that became known as quilombos during the 17th century. And they also intermarried with some indigenous groups as well. There are people, in fact, there's a woman who's a friend of mine on Facebook, and she considers herself Afro-Indigenous, that they live in the Amazon forest,
yeah,
and they identified both with the African people as well as the indigenous native people of Brazil, the so-called South American Indians. So,
Interesting.
yes, it's quite interesting. But the European influence still remains very strong in Brazil. But in Angola, uh, yes, Queen Nzinga was a formidable figure, and she set the stage for the emerging, what became the emerging resistance against Portuguese colonialism in Africa, which grew stronger during the 18th and the 19th centuries. And even after the Atlantic slave trade was outlawed by the British during the early part of the 19th century, they continued to export enslaved Africans out of the continent to Brazil. And what's interesting about that is that Brazil was the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish chattel slavery.
Yeah.
And it was abolished as a result of an uprising against the Brazilian monarchy. Uh, Even after Brazil became independent during the early part of the 19th century from Portugal, it became independent under a monarchy. And the monarchy existed from about 1810 all the way up to 1888. And it was only after 1888, when the monarchy was overthrown, that slavery was abolished in Brazil. But in Angola itself, the conditions of the African people were dire.
Dire.
People were forced into work brigades. There was massive sexual exploitation that went on there. And of course, all of this resulted in a very militant and very oppositional population, particularly going into the 19th and, of course, the early 20th century.
Uh, Brazil, no, no, not Brazil. Portugal
Mm-hmm.
was once ruled by I believe they were ruled by a monarch, a
Yes.
proto-fascist Catholic monarch, and then later. So these are the kind of folks competing with Britain, the Dutch, France, Germany, Belgium, the United States when it becomes its own independent. So, but at some point, Portugal becomes a fascist dictatorship, and we're talking real fascism, like Catholic fundamentalism, far right fascism, very anti-people, very feudalistic, and so forth, like that. When Portugal, when these colonies under Portugal were ruled by this fascist dictatorship, did the conditions of the people grow ever more, as you said the words, dire? Did they grow ever more dire when Portugal was under the fascist dictatorship? I'm very curious your response.
Yes, because in 1884 and 1885 at the Berlin Conference, that's where the geographical lines were drawn, ostensibly and carved in stone. But of course, that fell apart 2 decades later with the outbreak of the First Imperialist War. But the Portuguese monarchy was overthrown in 1910. And after that, they had what was called the First Republic. And the First Republic existed between 1910 up until about 1926. And but it was marked, by a lot of factionalism and, of course, a lot of different problems associated with. Then in 1926, there was another, the so-called the so-called dictatorship that developed between 1926 and 1932 after the collapse of the First Republic. And then in 1932, there was the so-called corporatist system of governance, which was capitalist and colonialist, but was very, very undemocratic. Pretty much fascist
Yeah.
in 1926. So this lasted between 1926 and 1932. And then, of course, 1932, you had the rise of Salazar and the corporatist state. And they continued to function up until about 1968, where Salazar went off the scene and another dictator, Cantano, came to power in 1968. He lasted up until 1974. with the so-called officers' coup. But a lot of this had to do with the instability that was fostered by problems within the colonial system in Africa. Because the Portuguese had Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde.
Yeah.
They also had Angola, which was a major colony, Sao Tome and Principe, which we talked about earlier.
East Timor
So
as well,
yes,
correct?
and Mozambique
Yeah.
as well, which is in the east. Yeah, so by 1974, these contradictions had come to the fore. The military elements within the Portuguese army, particularly the junior officer corps, were tired of being sent to the so-called Portuguese overseas territories, which were actually their colonies. And they overthrew the government on April 25th of 1974. And one of the first things they said after they overthrew the government was that they were going to grant independence to the African colonies, which is what happened. The process began in 1974. Guinea-Bissau was the first country to gain its independence in 1974. And then later, in 1975, Mozambique gained its independence in June of 1975. Then Angola on November 11th of 1975. But this whole independence transitional process, in particular in Angola, was marred by a lot of conflict, and a conflict that eventually erupted into a civil war. A civil
Okay,
war where, yeah.
before we get there, let me ask one last question about what the conditions were like for the colonized and the colonizers.
Mm-hmm.
So settler colonialism has been a theme when we talk about when we talk about certain African colonies and even countries that weren't settler colonies. It still was pretty horrendous place. I mean, great if you were a colonial expat and whatnot, but just terrible if you were if you were the colonial subject. So our of course, you know, our conversation on Algeria and the research I did on Algeria was really radicalized me and really made me understand just why the Algerians were so adamant of overthrowing French colonialism, and it makes me even more empathetic now when we talk about the French immigrant populations and so forth like that. So when we talk about settler colonialism and Portuguese colonialism, how were the Portuguese, particularly in Angola, compared to the Brits in Kenya, the French in Algeria, and the settler colonialism, which we will be exploring at length in Zimbabwe and South Africa? I'm curious your response.
Yes, they were all very brutal, highly exploitative, and racist. Although there are some who suggest, and there's some validity to this, that in the Portuguese colonies, the situation was much worse. For example, in Angola, during the whole period of Portuguese colonial control, they never built one university in the entire country, not even one. So a lot of the people who lived there were highly uneducated in terms of European languages. They were not, accustomed to higher education at all. So they heavily underdeveloped their colonies. So Samora Machel, who became the leader of the Mozambique Liberation Front, Frelimo, described Portugal as the most backward European colonial country that was operating in Africa. That was his assessment, and I think that's kind of sums it up, in that regard. So they had a very difficult time in terms of organizing people, but at the same time, once independence was achieved, it was very difficult in regard to development. But in Angola, there emerged three liberation movements, main liberation movements there, starting in the 1950s with the MPLA, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, which was founded around 1956. Later, there was the founding of the Union for the Total Independence of Angola, which was largely based in the southern part of the country, and then a National Front for the Liberation of Angola, which was based in the north, on the border with the then Zaire and today's Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, these,
Okay. So that's a
yeah,
perfect segue to this question.
good.
So when did Angola become independent, and was it one of violent struggle or one of peaceful transitions of power? And then my follow-up question to that is, what were the conditions that led to the Angolan Civil War? And talk to us about who were the warring sides and which outside influence sides with their proxies described, and described us that, and how brutal this hot war during the Cold War was when one looks at Angola and how it fared during the Cold
Yeah, well, during the Portuguese colonial period, uh, the efforts for nonviolent resistance and nonviolent reforms were pretty much non-existent. We talked about Guinea-Bissau earlier in 1959 when they had a huge massacre of dock workers who went on strike just demanding more money and better working conditions, and they were slaughtered. So there was a realization that no, this is not going to be possible on a nonviolent basis. In 1961, the MPLA began their armed struggle against the Portuguese, and that lasted for some 14 years. But also, UNITA was supposedly involved as well in the armed struggle against the Portuguese, although some people do dispute that, saying that they were not actually involved in the struggle against Portuguese colonialism, that they worked with the Portuguese uh, with the idea in mind that they would be installed once independence was achieved. The FNLA, the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, headed by a man named Holden Roberto, was based in the northern part of Angola, and they had very close ties with the Mobutu regime in Zaire and later the DRC. In fact,
Interesting.
it was rumored many years ago, and this may be true, that Holden Roberto, who was the head of the FNLA, was married to Mobutu's sister. So he was actually the brother-in-law of Mobutu Sese Seko. We can look deeper into that, but
Oh no, yeah. Let's definitely do that. That would be fascinating, given my Congolese background and so forth. So.
right. But irrespective of familial relationships, FNLA and UNITA was largely backed by the Western imperialist countries. Holden Roberto was backed by the Central Intelligence Agency, and that was revealed in a memoir that was put out by a US FBI and CIA operative who was African American, a man by the name of Earl Anthony. Earl Anthony had been a member of the Black Panther Party in its early days in the Bay Area in California. And he wrote a book called, I believe it was called Picking Up the Gun, came out in around 1970. Now, he had been expelled the year before, or even 2 years before, from the Black Panther Party, who accused him of being a police agent. Now, he denied this, but he did put out a book in 1970 about his experience with the Black Panther Party and how he was forced out. And but he claimed to still be a revolutionary and so forth. This book was promoted by the ruling interests inside the United States, even the media. He was given a faculty job at Howard University and some other schools, even published a couple of books.
So because of COINTELPRO, the
Yes.
Black Panthers were overly paranoid, so they kicked out someone who actually was one of the good ones, who later becomes a CIA agent and whatnot.
No, he was actually an FBI and CIA operative while he was in the party, and they figured this out. And what happened was that later on, around the early 90s, so we're talking about 20 years later, this same figure, Earl Anthony, wrote a book called Spitting in the Wind. And in this book, he does, confess to being a government agent, police, FBI, and so forth. He was a horrendous predator, sexual predator, an abuser of women, a rapist of women, but the police never did anything to him. He used to pick up sex workers on the street and rape them, refuse to pay them, and things of this nature. And he said it was so bad at one point in San Francisco that none of the women on the street would get in the car with him because, the word had gotten around that this guy is nothing but an abuser, a robber, and a rapist. So
Wow.
anyway, what happened was that in this book, Spitting in the Wind, that came out in the early 1990s, he admits as well to working for the CIA. And he talked about how he went to Zaire, I believe in 1971 or 72, and met with the government there. And they gave him $50,000 in cash money that he brought back to the United States in a briefcase. And when he got to the United States, he joined the African Liberation Support Committee, which is a whole nother story in and of
Oh
itself
my
in the early
God.
70s. He joined them, and in doing that, he was promoting the supremacy of the FNLA with money. He was trying to get people to support the FNLA in the United States, principally African Americans, and in exchange for that, they were being given money for that. Well, of course, that didn't work out because the FNLA was soon defeated after the commencement of the Civil War in late 1975 in Angola. So that just gives you an idea of who was
This
behind the FNLA, who was behind Roland Roberto.
this CIA grifter, this
Yeah,
FBI grifter that you were talking about, did he by any chance, I mean, given that he was so upset that the Black Panthers knew that he was an agent and kicked him out of
right.
the party, did he infiltrate the uh the kind of like sort of like pan Africanist leftist community move, which was disgustingly bombed by the Philadelphia local government, backed by the U.S. federal government. Was he involved in infiltrating them and trying
No,
to?
that was the MOVE organization.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of him trying to infiltrate them. It would be very difficult to infiltrate during that time period. But he did infiltrate the African Liberation Support Committee, which was formed around 1971. And it was that committee that had organized the first African Liberation Day in the US in 1972 in Washington, D.C., and in San Francisco. But he did infiltrate some of their ruling committees and was promoting the FNLA as a legitimate liberation movement, and that was being projected to people inside the United States. There were others who were promoting the Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, headed by Jonas Savimbi as well. And then, of course, there were people who supported the MPLA Workers' Party, which it became as well. So you had three different so-called liberation movements that were vying for recognition and support in Africa as well as in the international community. And this is what led to the civil war that erupted in Angola during 1975.
perfect segue to this question. So now, the Angola War of Independence, according to historians on Wikipedia, they believe the constant Angolan armed struggle against Portuguese independence was February 4th, 1961 to April 25th, 1974. Now, the Angolan Civil War, despite it being very much a Cold War, hot proxy war, it lasted way after the Cold War was done, and sadly, the USSR and the Eastern Bloc communist nations dissolved. So the Angolan Civil War, which saw the U.S. fighting alongside South Africa under apartheid, under the white supremacist, Jim Crow on steroids apartheid government. You already mentioned the Congo Zaire under Mobutu, both against the far left Marxist MPLA, which was backed by proxy. It was backed by the USSR and helped immensely with boots on the ground, the Cuban army. The war officially ended in 2002. Uh, uh, so, talk to us about the Angolan Civil War and who arguably won in this war. Because again, when the Cold War ended, even when apartheid, racist, Jim Crow, settler colonial practices ended. And even when Mobutu was ironically ousted in a Western backed coup by Rwandans and Ugandan Western backed proxies, did Cuba continue to support the MPLA against its far right enemies and left wing rivals, or was it by then was it solely a domestic civil war between Angolans. Talk to us all about that.
No, the people in Angola, the MPLA, are still very much indebted to the Republic of Cuba. They gave political support along with the Soviet Union and the other Comecon countries that existed in Eastern Europe, as well as others, such as Vietnam and the other countries in Southeast Asia who overthrew U.S. imperialism that same year, 1975. 1975 was a big year in terms of revolutionary transformation. The U.S. was defeated in Vietnam and Laos, as well as Cambodia, which later became Kampuchea, then back to Cambodia. And yes, the Cubans were very instrumental in the process of supporting the MPLA in Angola. And when it became obvious that UNITA and the FNLA were nothing but proxies of Western imperialism. Now, during the Cold War, there was also a split within the socialist camp between the People's Republic of China and the USSR.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, and the People's Republic of China did support the UNITA organization for an extended period of time, up until my understanding was December 31st, 1975, they put out a statement saying they were dropping all support, political and material, for the UNITA organization because they could not justify continuing to support this organization that was fighting right alongside the apartheid South Africa Defense Forces, the SADF, which was a brutal military operation, both domestically, inside South Africa. They were also occupying Namibia, and then they invaded southern Angola in 1975 to bolster UNITA. They had also supported the FNLA, but the FNLA was defeated early. The FNLA was also supported by Zaire, and of course, Zaire had been supported by the Central Intelligence Agency, and therefore the FNLA and Roland Roberto were in essence CIA operatives during this particular time period in the mid 1970s. So what happened there was negotiations between these three groups that began around January of 1975, called the Alves talks, and they came up with an agreement that they would have elections, and that whoever came out of the elections would form, whoever came out victoriously would form an independent government. Well, this, of course, broke down during the period of 1975. And then when the MPLA took over Luanda, which was like, had been for centuries, a major outpost for Portuguese colonialism and world capitalism, the South African Defense Forces sent their troops into southern Angola in an effort to overthrow the MPLA dominance, particularly in the capital of Luanda and also in the central part of the country. And then they also had to fight, the MPLA had to fight the FNLA under Roland Roberto. They were defeated. So what happened was that in November of 1975, the independence was supposed to take place on November the 11th. Agostinho Neto, who was a medical doctor and a poet, who was one of the co-founders of the MPLA, called out for assistance. And the Cuban internationalists, all volunteers, sent in 55,000 soldiers into Angola. And they worked alongside the MPLA, or the FAPLA, which is the military wing of the MPLA, to defeat the UNITA forces, as well as the South African Defense Forces in the southern part of Angola. And this was done by early 1976. Now, it wasn't just the South African Defense Forces that were attempting to prevent the MPLA from taking power. It was also the United States that was heavily involved. They had sent CIA operatives, they sent mercenaries into Angola to assist UNITA and the FNLA in preventing the MPLA from taking power.
Yeah.
What happened was that by February of 1976, they had defeated the UNITA, at least on a temporary basis, and the SADF, working alongside the Cuban internationalist forces. And they actually captured CIA personnel and mercenaries in Angola. And they were put on trial in early 1976 and executed. This is a major deal in 1976 that this African liberation movement that was left leaning, that was socialist oriented, actually captured, put on trial, and executed CIA agents in Angola. So even after they became independent and consolidated their power in Luanda and other areas of the country, the United States refused to recognize Angola for decades because of
Mm.
these developments inside of that country. Also, Angola, we have to point out, is a major oil producing state. And they were then. The company that at the time was known as Gulf Oil. They had a huge uh, position in Angola and pumped a lot of oil out of the country. So the MPLA consolidated its power in early 1976, and the Cubans remained there from 1975 all the way up to 1989 because there were periodic invasions by the South African Defense Forces, and also the UNITA organization was working hand in glove with the apartheid regime. And the US was still funding these counter-revolutionaries and in essence funding the South African Defense Forces as well in the southern part of Angola. So this went on for many, many years until they were eventually defeated in a series of battles during late 1987 and early 1988.
Let me ask this question. So the West, as you mentioned, largely led by the U.S., they backed two far-right movements against the MPLA. You already mentioned UNITA, whose legacy, I believe the party actually still exists. UNITA actually still
Yeah,
exists.
they do. They
And
say they're a political party now in Angola. They do stand for elections.
yes, and the Legacy Party. I mean, this is how right they are. So the legacy of UNITA is the following: they are a member of the Democrats Union of Africa, which is the African continental branch of the International Democracy Union. The IDU, as I've mentioned many times, is led by Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister of Canada, member of the Conservative Party. And this is where the global center right to far right meet to see how they can advance their hideous agenda, how they can help one another out, and so yeah, that's that basket of deplorables. But they're a member. They're the member of the African branch of the IDU, but they're also officially a member of the Centrist Democrats International, used to be Christian Democrat International. This is also where all of these, soft right to far right to yeah, this is another competing organization of where the global right wing gets together. And so the U.S. and its allies was backing UNITA, and as you mentioned, some of their proxy forces was backing the FNLM, National Liberation Front of Angola, and so, with all that being said, talk to us now about the socio-economic legacies of the following Angolan leaders. A lot of them during the time of the Civil War, all members of the MPLA, which, funnily enough, is a member of Socialist International, which is where the world's center-left to left-leaning parties meet to see how they can advance a left-leaning world and help one another out. However, it's long controversially been dominated by Western European, British, Nordic, Australian, and Western center-left parties who still harbor and advance a colonial agenda. And since the 80s onwards, many of them have pivoted to the right on socioeconomics and workers' rights. But anywho, talk to us about the socioeconomic legacy of Agostino Neto, who lived 1922 to 1979. He was in office November 11th, 1975 to September 10th, 1979. Talk to us about his socio-economic legacy and his successor, Jose Eduardo dos Santos, who was in office officially from September 21st, 1979, all the way up until August 27th, 1992, and then was reelected August 27, 1992 to September 25th, 2017, what can you say about the socio-economic legacies and that of social mobility of these three historic leaders, all members of the MPLA?
Yeah, well, the MPLA was considered a Marxist oriented national liberation movement. This is why they were supported by Cuba and the USSR. And prior to the collapse of the Comecon countries, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, which the Soviet Union was a part of, the German Democratic Republic, and even Vietnam and Mozambique, for example, and Angola were observer members because they were in the early phase of their independence process. So they were considered Marxists, and their alliances had been that of other progressive forces in former Portuguese colonies during the Civil War. Well, not during the War of National Liberation. There was a group formed called the Council for National Liberation Movements in Portuguese Colonies. CONCEPT was the acronym. And this consisted of the MPLA, Frelimo in Mozambique, and the PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. UNITA was not a part of that group, and neither was the FNLA. So in the West, this provided an opening for even some leftists and Black nationalists and so forth to say, well, you know, the Soviet Union and Comecon and Cuba could not pick and choose who the leaders of independent Africa are. And then during the 70s, there was also, as I mentioned before, this split within the socialist camp. So you had people in the United States that were more sympathetic to China, and the others were more sympathetic to the Soviet Union. And there were some people who said, well, there should be unity in the socialist camp between China and the Soviet Union, which did not happen all the way up until the collapse of the Soviet Union. So yes, it provided openings to create confusion and also divisions, not only in Africa, but also in the African diaspora. And we saw that very clearly during the 1970s in the United States. Even the African Liberation Support Committee was racked with factional divisions over whether or not UNITA was a legitimate liberation movement or whether or not the MPLA was the only legitimate liberation movement. And I think the people who supported MPLA, of course, were most correct because it was exposed, you know, that UNITA and the FNLA were proxies of imperialism through the CIA, through the South African Defense Forces, and other right-wing Western imperialist interests. So, yeah, I think that the MPLA's legacy is that they did bring about legitimate independence of the country. They were able to consolidate Angola as one nation because if they were too weak, or if they didn't have international solidarity and assistance from Cuba, from Guinea-Conakry, and others, Angola would probably be a very different country today. So yes, Agostinho Neto was the first president, but he died like approximately 4 years after national independence.
What did he die from,
death,
actually?
Yeah, 1979.
What did he die from, though?
They said it was cancer.
Okay.
Yeah, it was cancer, but he was a medical doctor, a poet, theoretician. And after he died, Jose Eduardo dos Santos took over and ruled from 1979 up until 2017, as you mentioned. Now, after the collapse of the USSR and the Comecon countries, there was confusion within the other existing socialist and socialist-oriented countries. We saw the decline, for example, in 1991 of the Workers' Party of Ethiopia, which was headed by Mengistu Haile Mariam. And of course, the US engineered the placement of the TPLF-led Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. In 1971, the Undersecretary of State for African Affairs, Herman Cohen, in negotiations in London in the spring of 1991, they were not able to reach any agreement between the Workers' Party of Ethiopia government, the EPRDF, and even the EPLF, which was the Eritrean Liberation Movement. So Cohen told the EPRDF to move into Addis Ababa and take control of the state. By that time, the Mengistu government had pretty much collapsed. So they were involved in regime change in Ethiopia. They also continued to support UNITA in the southern part of Angola. In fact, Jonas Savimbi traveled several times to the United States, even met with Ronald Reagan, who was the president of the United States during the 1980s. So yes, the Cold War was continuing all through the 1980s. The U.S. was providing weapons to UNITA, Stinger missiles. If you read about them, they were also delivered to the so-called Mujahideen in Afghanistan. These were missiles that were supposed to be able to take out Soviet-built aircraft. So they were heavily involved in all of this.
You shoot the rocket, and if it hit, and if it hits your plane, it literally disappears. The entire materials, and you just kind of are, yeah, you become dust more or less.
Yeah, but despite all this, they could still not create a situation to bring about a dominance by the UNITA organization after the FNLA had collapsed. So what happened was that in Namibia, the Southwest Africa People's Organization, which was a revolutionary national liberation movement, was headed by a man named Sam Nujoma, and prior to him, it was Andimba Toivo Ya Toivo. Due to the defeat of the South African Defense Forces in early 1988 in a key battle at Quito Cuanavale, with the assistance of the Cuban internationalists, as well as PLAN, the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, which was the armed wing of SWAPO, they had to reconfigure their approach. So negotiations took place in 1988, early 1989. It was agreed that the South African Defense Forces would withdraw from southern Angola. A date was set for elections in Namibia, which took place in late 1989, and then on March 21st of 1990, Namibia became independent under SWAPO control. So these are major developments. Now, the month before Namibia, the Republic of Namibia came into existence, South Africa, under apartheid, agreed to release all of the political prisoners from the various liberation movements and the Communist Party. So on February 11th, 1990, Nelson Mandela was released, and many others. But even prior to that, though, people like Walter Sisulu and Govan Mbeki and others had been released beginning around 1988, 89, and so forth.
And
so it was clear that there was some type of transitional process taking place even within the apartheid government in South Africa.
And throughout all of this, the war is still raging, and it's the MPLA backed by the USSR and Cuba that's winning.
Yes, it is.
Mostly Cuba because the USSR, is dissolved in the early '90s, late '80s.
Yeah, and it's really the Cubans and their military assistance and military consultation that really was central to the defeat of the South African Defense Forces and UNITA in Southern Africa. What happened was that as a result of these negotiations and as a result of the defeat of the South African Defense Forces, UNITA was forced to a ceasefire, and elections were held in 1992 in Angola. Multi-party elections were held in 1992 in Angola, which the MPLA won by a sizable majority. So Savimbi and UNITA said the elections were stolen. They reject the results, and they went back to war in 1992, and that war lasted for another decade until Savimbi was killed in 2002, and then, of course, the UNITA people agreed to put down their arms and become a political party.
So let me ask. Very briefly before we talk about Joao Lorenzo. So very briefly, in case our audience didn't get it. So when we look at the socio-economic legacy of Agostinho Neto and Jose Eduardo dos Santos, do you think their legacy is largely good or negative or a mixed bag at best, given that the conditions they were in, fighting a civil war, a huge and a huge and a huge world war, because they had to fight my mother's country of the Congo under Mobutu. They had to fight South Africa. I'm pretty sure Israel has its hand in all of this, and Britain and Canada and NATO members and EU members all play a dirty role in all of this. And
Yes.
and of course, when we talk about mining companies and so forth, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada are heavily involved in this. How do you is the legacy of the first three MPLA leaders? Would you say that that's largely positive? Could have been better had there not been the Western-backed civil war. And yeah, I'm curious your response on that.
Yes. If there had not been the opposition to the MPLA taking power, the situation could have been very much different. After Agostinho Neto's death and the ascendancy of the leadership of Jose Eduardo dos Santos, this went on for many, many years. But we had the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern European countries. On an international level, it weakened the capacity of the Cuban Defense Forces and also Cuban society as a whole, because Cuba went through what they called a special period during the early 1990s and during the 1990s, because they could not get support from the USSR. They had suspended support, and then the USSR collapsed. So it was a very difficult period for the Republic of Cuba. So Angola had to make adjustments to that whole process. So they moved more towards a mixed economy during
Okay.
the 1990s. And eventually the United States did agree to recognize them, and they normalized relations with the United States. However, during the period of Dos Santos' tenure, particularly towards the end, during the 2000s, there were reports of widespread corruption inside the MPLA government. Jose Eduardo dos Santos' daughter, Isabel dos Santos, was accused and actually brought up on charges of corruption. She was over the Ministry of Petroleum in the country. So after Jose Eduardo dos Santos resigned, we had the ascendancy of Lourenco, João Lourenco.
Yes.
And when he got in, the MPLA opened up a political campaign against corruption inside the government. And Isabel was, in fact, charged, with corruption. And I think she fled the country. She denied any wrongdoing. Nonetheless, they have been undergoing a process of rectification since 2017, 2018, the last 8-9 years. But today, Angola is a center of economic growth. China is a huge investor in Angola, and they have been attempting to rebuild society after 500 years of enslavement and colonialism, after a vicious civil war, after being at the center of the Cold War in Africa. They're attempting to rebuild their society during this particular time period.
Anything else you want to say about Joao Lorenzo and how you assess his time in office? Feel free to talk about any positives, if there's any, negatives, if there's any, or as I say, the fugly. You have the good and the bad and the fugly. So so feel free to talk a little bit more about him if need be.
Yeah, he has been able to keep the country united. He has been able to maintain power in the country through electoral means. They have also been involved in other diplomatic efforts. like trying to mediate the conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. A lot of time was spent on that. Nonetheless, there's been very little progress in that regard. The war is still going on, of course, between Rwanda on a lower level between Rwanda and the DRC. The M23 rebel groups are still functioning in two provinces, at least in the eastern DRC. And unfortunately, the president Felix Tshisekedi of the DRC and Paul Kagame of Rwanda actually traveled to the United States on more than one occasion to participate in mediation talks, but it has not stopped the conflict at all. Trump claimed he had ended the war in the eastern DRC between the Kinshasa and the capital of Rwanda, and that has definitely not happened at all. It's just another fraud on the part of the Trump administration. Kigali and Kinshasa are still estranged politically, and there's been many efforts to try to resolve this conflict. But Angola has definitely been involved.
I have to say, I'm a leftist, so I can't be so I can't be fans of Mobutu or an apologist for him. But it's just so unbelievable that Mobutu, one of the greatest allies to the United States, Canada, France, Belgium, the neo-imperial order, the neo-colonial order, how they betrayed him. Also, the way how the Western alliances betrayed Saddam Hussein and even the Shah himself. I mean, if that, I get that right wingers and the global right want like the U.S. to be the big dog because they believe in like the free market, blah blah blah. But how on earth how on earth those guys can trust the word of the U.S. when the U.S. betrays its own right wing allies like that? It's just astonishing.
It's amazing, and in the modern period, just recently, Iran. The fact that they were negotiating with the Islamic Republic of Iran. There was a press release put out on, I think it was February 26th, saying that the negotiations were bearing fruit, that they were positive. And then 2 days later, on February 28th, which will be 3 weeks tomorrow, both the Zionist state of Israel and the U.S. began bombing the Islamic Republic of Iran. And then, of course, in retaliation, Hezbollah began to engage in their armed struggle against the Zionist state. And the Israelis had violated the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Tel Aviv hundreds of times leading up to the recent outbreak of fighting. So, yes, they're not trustworthy. And that is the situation that we're still dealing with. Ask the Native Americans, ask the indigenous people of North America. Every single treaty that they signed after negotiations with the settler colonialists were broken. Every single one of them. Whether it's in Florida, with the Seminole Indians, whether it's the Creek and the Cherokee Indians, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, all of them were driven off their land and forced out to the Oklahoma areas. Some of the people, the Black Seminoles under John Horse, led people out of Oklahoma into Mexico, where some of their descendants still reside today. So the Underground Railroad not only went north, but it also went south into Mexico as well, because slavery had been outlawed in Mexico long before that in the 1820s. So yes, these people cannot be trusted. And we can see that right now with the Iran and the position that the Iranians have taken, that they're not interested in any more negotiations with the United States, that they're out to win this war, to ensure that the U.S. and Israel will not again engage in this type of aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran. So in Angola, even though there is recognition between Washington and Luanda, they cannot trust the U.S. To abide by any type of decent relationships And as I said, China now is a major investor in Angola. And of course, that is the situation that exists there right now in Angola and Southern Africa. But they played a major role in the Southern African Development Community, which is composed of 16 regional states, going all the way up to the Democratic Republic of Congo, over to Mauritius and the Seychelles, as well as other countries, Zambia, Botswana, Mozambique, Lesotho, Namibia, South Africa, Angola, and so forth. Interestingly enough, had visited Namibia in the summer of 1992, and they were still young as a country at that time. And the same day I arrived in the country, they were holding the inaugural summit of the Southern African Development Community in Windhoek. Now, before that, there was the Southern African Developmental Coordinating Council, which had existed between the mid 1980s all the way up until 1992. And when I was getting off the plane, Air Namibia at the time, I flew there from Johannesburg, South Africa. And when I was getting off the plane, the people there were asking me, was I there for the SADC conference? It was interesting. So I said, no, I'm just here to visit some friends who I went to graduate school with who were SWAPO members, and they were now officials in the government, but no, I didn't want to lie and say I was there for the SADC conference because if they discovered I was not a delegate, but I thought that was very interesting. And then even when I was waiting for my friend to pick me up from the airport, one of the guys from the government, I saw him walking down the hall and he walked up and he looked at me and said, are you here for the SADC conference? I said, no, I'm not. I'm here to meet, I mentioned the person's name. He said, oh yeah, you know him? Yeah, we know him, so on and so forth. Okay. So anyway, that was very interesting development. But yeah, Angola is one of the major oil producers on the African continent. I think right now they may be number 3 or number 4. Nigeria is still number 1. Libya, which has gone down tremendously after the overthrow of Gaddafi and the destruction of the country in 2011. But now their oil production is back up again. And after them, I believe it is Angola.
Let me ask this question, Ben. I mean, you've already answered it, but let me pick your brain out a bit more then, which is after the Cold War, what's been Angola's relations with the U.S., Canada, the EU, NATO countries, Portugal itself, and very curious. When we talk about Cuba, so Cuba during the 90s and 2000s, what's been Angola's relations with the Cuban Communist government, which really was on the front lines in their independence. I remember talking to Cindy Sheehan, who's been on
Okay.
who's been on the program before, and we once did a special all things Cuba episode because Cindy is one of those leftists who is very much, Cuba solidarity. She's not one of those leftists who will ever, shit on Cuba before defending
In
Cuba.
Venezuela too. Yeah.
Yeah, she's great anti-imperialist, and
He's a friend of Hugo Chavez. Yeah, right.
yeah. And Cindy told me that the end that Cuba, which fought, did guerrilla warfare for lots of Latin American countries that were fighting U.S.-backed fascists. Of course, Cuba was involved. I controversially think that there should have been much more moderation when it came to Eritrea and Ethiopia and Somalia. I'm going to put that one aside. Cuba has largely, though, been a force for good in the world, though. No and ifs or
Yeah, even today.
Yeah, exactly. And today, but Cindy said to me that the impact of Cuba's very long involvement in the Angolan Civil War on the right side of history, she said, devastated the people. She said so many soldiers died, so many soldiers came back with very severe shell shock, or what's known as PTSD. She said, in terms of Fidel Castro's own mental health, he real he was devastated by the horrible impact of soldiers coming back from the Angolan Civil War, and that apparently after after the fall of the USSR and so forth, while Cuba still helped out with a lot of guerrilla warfare and intelligence, that Fidel couldn't. He just did not want to send Cuban soldiers off to die in a lot of these very costly wars. So that being said, very curious how are Angolan Cuban relations since the end of the Cold War and Angola's relations
Very
with
good.
the collective West and whatnot.
Very good. And various presidents have traveled repeatedly to Havana. They have very good relations between Angola and the Republic of Cuba.
And talk a bit more about Angola's current relations with the collective West, the US, Canada, Britain, Portugal, even, and the EU, NATO countries members.
I would categorize it as an uneasy, normalized relationship. We know with the vast wealth of Angola and its strategic position, the imperialists still have their eyes on destabilizing the country and installing a client regime. They never give up. We saw this all during the period of the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. So much wealth was taken out of Angola in terms of agricultural products. It served as a port for the enslavement of Africans. Many Africans were taken out of Angola during the Atlantic slave trade process. So yes, this is an uneasy normalization. And we don't know how long that's going to last, particularly under the Trump administration, which is making it very difficult for countries around the world, not just those in the global South, but you've seen what has happened over the last 3 weeks. His attacks on even some of the closest allies of U.S.
Exactly.
imperialism.
Like Nigeria comes to mind.
Yeah,
when
but also,
when two of the major far right parties, pro oil parties, and he attacks his own allies. It's like, dude, they're in the same club as the Republican Party. They're part of the IDU and so forth. So it's
yeah,
yeah.
that's the reality. And even the UK, he made a statement that Sir Keir Starmer was no Churchill. I mean, what kind of ridiculous statement is that? I don't know if you heard that.
No, I
It was in
completely
the
missed
it
that.
was in the media a couple of weeks ago because he wanted the British to join him in this war in an attempt to change the regime in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party had no interest in doing that. Now, the right-wing Conservative Party and Reform UK, during the first few days of the war, was saying, yeah, Britain should get in. But that soon changed after about a week when they saw that the government in Tehran was not collapsing, that there were missile attacks. I think now they're up to 62, 64 volleys of missiles and True Promise 4 being leveled at the state of Israel, hitting the nerve centers of the Zionist entity, and also attacking Western petroleum as well as natural gas industries throughout the entire West Asia region,
Well,
particularly in those states that are nothing but puppets of U.S. imperialism and Zionism. The,
I would say to President Trump and the MAGA movement that if they want a real right wing comeback, far right coalition comeback in the UK, as long as Donald Trump doesn't talk about annexing England and making it the 53rd state,
mm-hmm.
I think it's safe to say that Keir Starmer, the writing's on the wall, and I think he will be unseated, and the Conservatives might have a comeback with Reform as coalition,
Mm-hmm.
as coalition partners. Going back to Angola, I have to ask this though: what
Mm-hmm.
is Angola's relations with BRICS collectively, or individual members of BRICS, and what's been Angola's response to the anti-French wave that's been happening in Africa?
Well, they have very cordial relations with BRICS and the BRICS countries. I don't believe they are formal members of it yet. And BRICS is going to be in a crisis based upon this war that's taking place in the Persian Gulf. Because, like India, for example, which is a key player in BRICS, has very close relations with the Zionist state of Israel.
Under Modi,
And
yeah, and the BJP, yeah.
yes, unfortunate. And probably some of that has to do with the whole Kashmir question being unresolved, because in 1948, there was supposed to have been a referendum on the future of Kashmir, just like in Palestine, where there was supposed to be two states, the so-called two-state solution. Now, that two-state solution was imposed by imperialism, and it's been a complete failure. So they were supposed to have a Jewish homeland. That's according to the Balfour Declaration of 1917. But there's been no two-state solution even after 1947, 1948. So that's going to be a serious problem, I think, going forward, even for BRICS. We don't know how this war is going to turn out. For example, if the U.S. lands ground troops wherever, whether it's on Karg Island, which belongs to the Iranian government, or whether it's they're going to bolster their forces in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Bahrain, or if they're going to send more troops into Iraq, where they already have a few thousand troops left, or northeastern Syria, where they do have troops there as well, where the oil is being produced and pumped out in northeastern Syria. We'll have to see. We'll have to see where they land, and then after they land, what are they going to do? But it's going to be disastrous for U.S. imperialism, because not only do you have the Islamic Republic of Iran to contend with, there are other resistance movements in the region that are allied with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Even in Iraq itself, the Popular Mobilization Units and others are allied with the Islamic Republic, and they have engaged in attacks even on the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. So it's going to be a very, very interesting period. I think the U.S. imperialists are in a desperate situation. I mean, how far to the right can you go and try to maintain some semblance of hope and victory? That is the main question. But I think the U.S. capitalist system is in deep crisis, and Trump is a manifestation of this crisis. You know, he feels, and the people in the ruling class who support him feels, that the only way the United States can maintain its dominance is to institute a fascist state in Washington. So if they can do that, it's going to be disastrous for the people of the United States and indeed the world. If they're defeated, then I think that will be a major victory for people throughout the not only West Asia, but throughout the entire world, including here in the United States.
My second to last question is this. If we critically look at the MPLA's time in office, even if there was no civil war, which the country is still struggling to heal from those wounds, Angola, despite the revolutionary left government in power, there is still unspeakable, horrific levels of extreme poverty, which sadly is a common feature in much of Africa, from the west to the east, to central, to sub-Saharan Africa, to southern Africa, the island nations, and even the north. The levels of grotesque inequality would actually shock many people. And is this because the MPLA? You've already answered it, but let's go in a little bit deeper. Is this because the MPLA, like other African Marxists and communists and some who were, social democratic, governments, when in power, even by popular mass support, the government is either willingly, governs by advancing neoliberal, neocolonial policies, and others simply have their arms tied behind their back because of WTO rules and the IMF dictums or diktats that the nations, were foolish, to take under, these predatory loans, always with austerity attached. So when we talk about, unspeakable levels of, poverty in Angola, is that because of the Angolan government itself adopts neoliberal policies or is forced to by, the Western imperial order? Very curious your response.
Yeah, I think you just answered the question, you know, in outlining the crisis that is faced by the post-independence or post-colonial African states. Until imperialism and world capitalism are eradicated, poverty is still going to be persistent. And it doesn't matter, in my opinion, how much of the country has moved away from colonialism, and no matter how much natural resources, whether they're strategic minerals or metals, uh, poverty will continue to exist. And as long as Africa remains divided, it will also be a major problem. So what we have to move towards is the elimination of imperialism worldwide and a construction of socialism in Africa on a continental basis. In my opinion, this is the only solution that exists. If you look at the situation, for example, involving the African Union, you have 54 independent states and the Western Sahara, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, which is still not independent, still remains under the domination of the Kingdom of Morocco. You would think with 1.4 billion people that more progress could take place. But what we see now is greater instability. And I think it can all be traced back to imperialism. The lack of security, for example, in the Sahel region. More people are dying there from jihadists or terrorist violence than anywhere else in the world. And we know that groups like the JNIM, who are affiliated with Al Qaeda and the other groups that are affiliated with ISIS, are funded and propped up by US imperialism and its allies because they do not want Africa to consolidate or to unite. So what we see in Nigeria right now is that the JNIM is moving in addition to Boko Haram and the Islamic State of West Africa, which were allied, eventually became allied with Al Qaeda and ISIS. But still, these other groups like the JNIM, which is affiliated with those terrorist groups, are now moving into Nigeria. They're also heavily active in the Sahel region in West Africa, particularly in Mali. So until US imperialism is weakened and eliminated, these problems will persist throughout Africa because of the, as you mentioned, groups like the World Trade Organization and others still keep Africa and other developing regions, and even a lot of the people in the Western imperialist countries, trapped and mired in poverty. And that is the reality of the situation. We see extreme poverty even in the Western imperialist countries like the United States. In the UK, it clearly appears that the people are growing poor and poor every year. The same situation in France.
Yeah.
So yes, it's going to take a lot. And I think the leading capitalist states in the world have set up the world economy to the extent that they can maintain their dominance and also foster dislocation, instability, and impoverishment throughout the world. And that is the reality of the situation that people are facing right now, and it will continue until there's unity based on revolutionary socialism and anti-imperialism. That is the only way I see that this system, this whole process can be reversed.
Well, you already answered my final question, but let me ask it again. Final question. Regardless of whatever shortcomings, betrayals, and setbacks African leftist parties have done, isn't the only way for Angola when we talk about the MPLA or any nation similar like Tanzania to that the only way to stop this scourge of extreme poverty and whatnot, a very tiny precarious middle class, a vast exploited working poor, and so forth, that the only way to eradicate all of that is if we continue to struggle and advance pan-Africanism, leftism, socialism, Marxism.
Yeah, I agree. That is the only way forward. Africa has to unite under socialism in order to reclaim its position in world history. And we have to keep in mind that prior to the 15th century, the center of the world economy was not in the West, was in the East, the Indian Ocean basin, areas of the African continent, and of course, the areas today known as West Asia, the Far East, Central Asia, and South Asia. And the BRICS organization, despite all of its contradictions, seems to be pointing in that direction again, that the center of the world economic system will shift away from North America and Western Europe to the peoples of the so-called global South. That is the only solution as I see it. And that's why Iran is a hated enemy of US imperialism and imperialism as a whole, because they have been able to survive for 47 years under extreme sanctions, destabilization campaigns, targeted assassinations, but they're still fighting on the front lines against imperialism. And just look at Iran, all the leaders they have assassinated just in the last 3 weeks. And prior to that, the nuclear scientists that were killed, and people from allied organizations like Hezbollah. They killed the Secretary General of Hezbollah in 2024. They killed Ismail Haniyeh, who was the General Secretary of the Hamas resistance organization in Palestine, was also killed
also
right
Gaddafi's
in Tehran.
and Gaddafi's son recently.
Exactly, was also killed in Libya. So they're going to continue to kill people in an effort to destabilize and divide the masses in failed attempts, in these failed attempts to maintain their hegemony, not only in those geopolitical regions, but throughout the world.
You know what? Actually, just before just before we close this, I have to ask this question. You're a regular contributor to Press TV. Press TV often invites you. For people who don't know Press TV, Press TV is in it is an it is an Iranian state-funded media outlet. It broadcasts in English and French, and and many other languages. I really like Press TV, and I think Press TV is actually quite underrated and criminally overlooked. It has many great documentaries and many great left-leaning programs, but unfortunately, due to the sanctions and the British and French vendetta against Iran, often the YouTube channel is censored on and off, and individual journalists who have their own YouTube channels is often censored. And even if you go on the website, it tends to be quite shoddy at times. And I know you're a regular contributor to Press TV, Arnold August, who's been on this program, the expert on all things Cuba, a real expert. He's often, invited to speak on Press TV, and we've had twice on this program, Dr. Mara Osman, who unfortunately her program Midi Stream is censored on YouTube and so forth. So which is very annoying. She does one of the best programs on Press TV, and one of her regular guests and contributors to another program she's doing, Julia Hassem. She's been on the program before to talk about all things Hezbollah and so forth. So I ask all of this because there is a war right now in Iran. None of them are based, in Iran, thankfully. But I know, with the attacks that the U.S. and Israel is doing, they have been targeting journalism outlets and so forth like that. The folks that who work on press, who work at Press TV in Farsi, in English, when it comes to America stuff, and in British, are they all well? Do you know if they're doing okay? If they're if they're safe or what?
As far as I know, the people who work in the English language Press TV are doing fine, and they continue to broadcast 24/7. There are some interruptions, of course. They've been bombed daily, all day, all night by both U.S. imperialism and Israeli Zionism. But it is remarkable that they're still hanging in there. They're still broadcasting, and they're still on board in terms of the anti-imperialist struggle. And they've been covering extensively what's happening in Lebanon, which is criminal as well. I mean, the IDF is bombing Lebanon on a daily basis, all day, all night. They have attempted to intervene militarily on the ground in southern Lebanon, but they've been beat back several times over the last few weeks. But yes, they are continuing with the targeted assassinations of Iranians as well as Lebanese. And but fortunately, in Iran and in Lebanon, the levels of leadership are such that they are able to replace people, competent people, after some of their top leaders have been assassinated. The supreme leader was killed on the first day of the war. They have killed the head of the Security Council, Ali Larijani. He was killed several days ago. They killed the head of the internal security militias, was killed in a targeted assassination. So yes, they're still killing, but the Iranians and the Lebanese are still fighting back feverishly against this attempt to seize control of the wealth and the territory of West Asia.
Well, the fact that she brought up Lebanon, I reminds me that I should say the following: two past guests, Dr. Mara Osman, Julia Hassem, Anis German, Rania Masri, Rania Khalek of Breakthrough News. We hope that all is well with them. We hope that all is well with their families, their colleagues, their entire communities, whether it's in Beirut or southern Lebanon, which is being reoccupied by that criminal, ghastly pirate state, outlaw state that is Israel, backed to the teeth by the West and some Gulf allies. So our thoughts and prayers with them. We hope that they're all safe. We hope that all of their loved ones are safe, and we hope that the Axis of Resistance is able to win this one. And we need a win.
Yes,
We really do need a win. So
most definitely. But they have hit Qatar even over the last 24 hours, one of their major liquefied natural gas processing facilities. The UAE has been hit hard. Dubai is considered a paradise,
yeah,
on the part of a lot of people. Even people from the United States go there to work and are paid huge sums of money for being employed there and treated very well in terms of the whole class and caste system that they have set up there. So they're very, very worried. But what is interesting about what has happened over the last 3 weeks is that the myth of security and protection related to US imperialism and Zionism over the Persian Gulf Arab monarchies have been obliterated. It has. So they cannot rely at this point on US imperialism or Zionism for their protection, for them to continue to exploit their own people and to exploit the resources that exist in vast amounts throughout the West Asia and Persian Gulf regions.
the Islamic Republic of Iran has the right to defend itself, and so do the Palestinians and the
Yes,
Lebanese. Hezbollah are not, and hopefully we'll see the rise of the Syrian Arab Republic.
yeah, there's
And
still progressive forces there.
and the rise of some kind of pan West Asian leftism in Iraq because
In
uh,
Syria too, yeah.
and because we do forget the Iraqis have told the United States and all other foreign troops to get out after the murder
For
of
years.
after the murder of Holisami, correct, right?
Yeah, they've been wanting them out for years. Even the Iraqi parliament have had legislation that voted them out, and they're refusing to leave because of the strategic resources that exist in Iraq and Syria. And we cannot forget Yemen, the Ansarullah resistance movement, which tactically, in my opinion, has not entered the conflict as of yet. But the leader, Abdul Malik, said that their fingers are on the trigger. So when they're needed, I think they definitely will enter this war as well.
Well, here's hoping that all of the people that you know who work at Press TV or anywhere in Iran, we hope that they will remain safe and so forth, and also our hearts goes out to again Dr. Mara Osman, Julia Hassem, Anis Germany, Rania Masri's family and friends in Lebanon, and also Rania Kalek herself, and we hope that they all continue to remain safe. It's yeah, and again, we have to step our game up in the anti-imperialist movement. Well, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One with Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Report. Abayomi, as everybody should know by now, longtime historian, journalist, Pan Africanist leftist, and anti-imperialist. And just before and just before we end, again, a reminder to our audience to share widely One Plus One, help us overcome the far right algorithms, help us break the monopoly of Western state media and still leftist websites. And again, donate to One Plus One if you prefer a different form of donation from PayPal, then email me. And again, sometimes Facebook blocks me, so it's very important that people share One Plus One. And again, so we are now on to so we are now in South Africa. The next country we will be exploring next week is Zambia, and join us for then. And then one last thing before I close us out is a special plea to One Plus One audience and so forth. Before we close, important request to anyone who considers me a friend or a dear comrade and claims to love the show. I always ask people to donate. We've not got any donations. But if people can, I want people to please consider becoming a paid Patreon to my friend Chris Richards. Chris hosts the Eclectic Radical. I'm a frequent guest there, and I sometimes co-host with him on the show. He's been on the show 3 times now, and we did a brilliant recording all about Iranian history in the U.S. Chris lost his job recently. He's struggling. He takes care of his wife, who struggles with diabetes. Everyone in the U.S. knows how scary it is when you lose a job and you don't find one quickly enough. So please, folks, do become a Patreon to Chris. You actually are helping me immensely if you do that, because me and Chris, we would like to do future trips to different parts of the world and do more on the ground journalism, but we can't do that if more people don't donate. So please, folks, do become a Patreon to him. And I live with my parents, so Chris needs the donations more than me. So again, please become a Patreon to him. It's money well spent than the overpriced streaming services. And if you give up at least Spotify, I can tell you, you're not missing anything, because YouTube has all the free music in the world. So please,
Yeah.
so please become a Patreon to Chris. I'll send the link. And again, all my best until then. Have a great weekend, folks. Hands off Iran, Lebanon, free Syria from El Jalani, free Palestine, BDS now, democratic secular one state solution. Good night and good luck. Yes, good night and good luck.